Hari Om, Namaste. I am Swami Sarveshananda from Chinmaya Mission, Dallas, Fort Worth. We are starting this program called Samskriti to capture the essence of our Sanatana Dharma, our Vedic culture. In the beginning, we will start with understanding Bhagavad Geeta through a series of talks. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryamkaravavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Gurur Brahma Gurur Vishnu Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha Gurureva Param Brahma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Hari Om. When we think of our Vedic culture, Vedas, and through the Vedas, our Upanishads are our basic direction which the ancient rishis have acquired from none other than the Lord Himself. But then, this entire knowledge of our Vedas, if one has to grasp it so that one can utilize it in our day-to-day life, Bhagavan Krishna has made it very user-friendly that He has given us Bhagavad Geeta. Now, Adi Shankaracharya ji says, Bhagavad Geeta Kinchid Adita in his Bhajagovindam, that every individual every day should at least read little bit of Bhagavad Gita, understand it, assimilate it, and then apply it in their day-to-day life. Now, Bhagavad Gita is a very unique text. Now, what does Bhagavad Gita mean? Bhagavat Gita. Bhagavat, that which is spoken by the Lord. Gita, the song of the Lord, or the message of the Lord. There are various Gitas that are enumerated in our scriptures. Rudra Gita, Hamsa Gita, Ashtavakra Gita, Bhikshu Gita. So there are lots of Gitas. Of those, the most prominent one is Bhagavad Gita, which comes in the Mahabharata. Mahabharata, which was written down by sage Vedavyas ji. In fact, I should say composed by sage Vedavyas ji, written down by Lord Ganesha himself. There is a story that goes wherein when Vedavyas ji had this inspiration to jot down and write the entire Mahabharata, almost 5 generations. In order to capture the essence of these 5 generations, he had a lot of content. And to bring this content with the flow that he was having, it would have been difficult for him to think and write. So he asked Naradji that if he could find someone who could write down at the speed with which he thought. So sage Narada, he goes around and he asks various people if they would be up for this challenge. And finally, Lord Ganesha accepts it, but with a condition of his own. He says that if Vedavyasji can continuously say his thought, he would write it down. But if there was a break, if he would stop, then he would stop writing. Now, this message was brought down by Narada to Vedavyasji, and Vedavyasji heard it, and he said, can you take back a condition of mine too? That whatever Lord Ganesha writes down, every sentence, every word that has been written down has to be understood thoroughly by him before he jots it down. Now, both of them, up for the challenge, start writing it down, and thus we have this amazing work with 100,000 shlokas or verses called Mahabharata. Let me remind you that sage Vedavyasji was an integral part of the entire Mahabharata. So, he was a contemporary of the Mahabharata times, and he had observed the entire story right in front of his eyes, and then he jots down the history as is. In Sanskritam, when we say itihasa, the history, it means iti ha asa, like this definitely indeed happened, as happened was written down. So, Vedavyasji gave this beautiful Mahabharata, and as Lord Ganesha was writing it down, in those moments where Vedavyasji had to gather his thought, and in today's world where there is absolutely no poetry that you can find in the mainstream media, that anything that anybody can churn out has become a poetry. But in Sanskritam, when you have to write down something in a poetic order, it has to have a meter. The words have to go through a certain sequencing. The words should have the depth and the meaning that has to be conveyed. So, with all these parameters put in, definitely even for the greatest and the best to gather their thought, it requires at least few moments. So, Vedavyasji, in and through the entire Mahabharata, has given out such beautiful gems spread across, that even for Lord Ganesha, he had to pause, he had to think before he could write them down. Some of the major ones that we can come across, there are multivarious of them, but major one of them I would say is Vidura Niti, which was a dialogue between Vidura and Dhritarashtra. Then we have the Yaksha Prashna, the dialogue between Yudhishthira and Yaksha himself. Lord Yama had taken the form of Yaksha. Then there is Sanat Sujatiya, message by the Sanat Kumaras to Dhritarashtra. Then there is the Bhagavad Gita itself. Then we have Vishnu Sahasranama, and then the last one is Uttara Gita. So, we have 6 major gems, of which the most prominent one is the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavada Proktam, that which is spoken by the Lord. Now, this Bhagavad Gita has a very unique stature. If we look at our scriptures, the scriptures are divided into 4 categories. The first and foremost, if a Hindu is asked, what is your scripture? Like in other religions, they have one scripture, one book. So, if we were to be asked, what is your book? What is your religious scripture? That would be our Vedas. But there are auxiliary scriptures which support and which take its roots from these Vedas. They are divided into 3 other categories. The first one is Veda, I have already mentioned. The other 3 are the Smriti, the Purana and the Itihasa. The Smriti is a code of conduct. Itihasa is a history, and Purana is a chronological compilation of various deities, various gods and goddesses, and their stories, and not just their stories, but the stories of their devotees as well. Vedas are spoken by the Lord. Smriti are written by various rishis. Itihasa, Ramayana and Mahabharata is written by sage Valmiki and sage Vedavyasa. The Puranas are 18 main ones and 18 auxiliary ones, total of 36, written by sage Vedavyasji. Now, the Bhagavad Gita has a unique stature because it is spoken by the Lord. Lord Krishna himself spoke this beautiful message. So, therefore, it is given the status of the Vedas themselves, because the Vedas are spoken by the Lord and Bhagavad Gita is also spoken by the Lord. Itihasa, it definitely is from Mahabharata, therefore, it is an integral part of Itihasa. It talks about the do's and don'ts that any human being, here I am not specifically saying that it has to be a Hindu, anybody who wants to live a life which can garner specific sense of joy, satisfaction and contentment for oneself, and through that to the rest of the world around them. Therefore, these do's and don'ts that have been given elevate Bhagavad Gita to a status of a Smriti Grantha. Smriti Grantha, the code of conduct. So, Bhagavad Gita gives us that. And then the last one is the Purana, the dialogue between the Lord and his devotees. This is definitely a dialogue between Bhagavan Krishna and Arjuna, his greatest devotee. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita is in itself a Veda, a Smriti, a Itihasa and a Purana, all in one. Now, I travel into a lot of universities and talk to the students. The language spoken there is a little different. So, how do I introduce Bhagavad Gita there? I tell them that today there are various gadgets, various instruments that we buy. And along with the purchase, along with the packaging, there comes a book, a manual of how to use it, how not to use it, what is the troubleshooting in it. So, a manual to use that equipment. Now, we as human beings are born without that manual. In fact, I would go to an extent of saying that the first kid born to the set of parents is an experiment. By the time it is a second kid, now they are more experienced, they know how to handle. I have overheard people say that when the first kid, the pacifier falls down, the parent picks it up, dutifully boils it or puts it in a boiling water, takes it out, rinses it out and then plugs it back into the child. With the second kid, they take it, dust it off, 5-second rule and put it back in. By the third kid, they look at that kid and the eye speaks volumes and ask the kid, pick it up, put it back in. They become more experienced. We don't come with those manuals. But if we were sincere enough to know about our own life, our own actions and the reactions to our actions, how does one manage to travel between various experiences so that we get a sense of joy and peace within, and through our actions we contribute joy and peace to everyone that we interact with? If there can be a manual, if there can be something that can be highlighted as a manual, as a user's guide, that would be this Bhagavad Gita. Therefore, Adi Shankaracharya ji, when he says Bhagavad Gita kinchid adita, read Bhagavad Gita at least a little bit every single day, assimilate it, digest it, understand it, and then apply it in your day-to-day life. So, religion has two aspects, like even the sciences have two aspects. One aspect is the pure science. The other aspect is called applied science. There is pure mathematics and applied mathematics, pure physics and applied physics. Similarly, in religion, we have two aspects. The rituals, the various things that one is ordained to do. And the other aspect is the philosophy. Philosophy is the abstractness of a religion, and the rituals are its practice in day-to-day life. Now, Bhagavad Gita talks both the abstractness and its application. Bhagavad Gita also has another uniqueness. The Upanishads have been given in a seclusion of a forest, of a monastery, of an ashram, or the seclusion of Himalayas in some caves. But Bhagavad Gita was very beautifully delivered, not in some secluded forest or a cave, but right in the work field. It was in the din and roar of that Mahabharata war, the clash between the two warring cousins, that this message was delivered. So, when we talk about the philosophical aspect, the abstractness, sometimes we miss in its application, the tactile application aspect of it. Sometimes when we get into mundane tacticality, we forget the philosophical aspect, the spirituality behind it. Bhagavad Gita combines both of them. Now, this Bhagavad Gita, who was it spoken to? It was none other than Arjuna himself. Arjuna, known as the ace warrior, the champion archman. He was known for his skill, he was known for his talent in archery, and he was one of the best. He and his brothers were called Pandavas. Now, if you look at it, both Pandavas and Kauravas belong to Kuru Vamsha, the Kuru dynasty. So, in technicality, even the Pandavas are Kauravas. The first time 22 years ago when I heard this, I was a little shocked. How can Pandavas be Kauravas? Because they are Kauravas indeed, because they belong to the Kuru Vamsha. Because they had to ask for their rights, so Vedavyasji divided them into the ones who are holding on to the throne, the ones who are claiming the throne. The ones who are holding on to the throne were named as the Kauravas, and those who are claiming their right were the Pandavas, the son of Pandu. Now, I will not go into the Mahabharata details starting from King Shantanu all the way down to the Pandavas, but I will just focus on Arjuna and the situation around Arjuna. This was in the battlefield. The battle was about to begin, and suddenly Arjuna seems to have a meltdown. He is collapsing from within. All his confusions, all his fears, all his anxieties started throwing up. Now, such a great warrior, what happened to him that he suddenly lost his focus, his clarity, his conviction? That he was so shattered from within that he could not believe what was happening. So, let us take into the historic evidence that was there. Dhritarashtra was born blind. He was the older son. He had one brother and one stepbrother. His younger brother, King Pandu, and the stepbrother or half brother, Vidura. In those days, it was a norm that the king should have all his vitality, all his organs of perception action functional, his capacities to the brim, so that he can lead the entire nation to a right course. But being born blind, it was decided that he would not become the king. King Pandu would be ordained to become the king. This didn't sit well with Dhritarashtra. Though he did not voice it, though he did not come forth challenging this, but inside, internally, he was devastated. He was threatened. He felt left out. He felt inferior. During different course of action, King Pandu had done something for which he had to repent. So he goes to the forest, all the way to the Badrikashrama, few kilometers down from Badrikashrama. King Pandu settled down and did his tapas. Now, while he was away, he gave the entire kingdom to be taken care of as a guardian to Dhritarashtra. Meanwhile, Dhritarashtra had 100 children or 101 children, because 100 of them were men and one girl, Duschala. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Pandu had 3 sons born of Kunti and 2 born of Madri. So 5 in total. I am not including here Karna, who was the first son of Kunti because of the boon that was given by Durvasa. So technicality again, that the Pandavas are 6 in total, but the 5 grew up together. Karna was abandoned, so 5 Pandavas. They were brought back after Pandu died into Hastinapura. Kunti was all along with them. Now Bhishma, who was the guardian angel for the entire Kuru Vamsha, decides that these children growing up require a guru, and he finds the able guru in Dronacharya. Now the children are raised, and there is a lot of competition, there is a lot of ill will, there is a lot of animosity between these cousins, that the children were hardly 5-6 years old, that there was an attempt on the entire Pandava flock. But it was because of Bhima, who drank up the entire porridge that was made, that it only impacted him. But lucky that he came back 1,000 folds more stronger. So the animosity is not new. As they grew up, there came a point wherein the kingdom had to be given to Yudhishthira. But instead of giving him the entire kingdom, what they did between Dhritarashtra, Shakuni and Duryodhana. They came up with a plan to divide the entire kingdom into two parts. Hastinapura, which is the well-developed city, was to be retained by Dhritarashtra for Duryodhana, and an abandoned land which was uncultivated. It was a forest full of rocks and boulders. It was a swamp. That area was called Indraprastha. That was given to the Pandavas. Taking up this challenge, the Pandavas settled down in Indraprastha, develop it so beautifully that their economy becomes thriving. The people start settling in from various different parts, and everybody finds an opportunity. And soon starts the comparison between Indraprastha and Hastinapura. Shakuni, with his devious plans, tries to snatch this Indraprastha away from the Pandavas through the game of dice, the first game of dice. Bhishma intervenes, and this entire kingdom is given back to Pandavas because they lost it through the devious mode of Shakuni. The second time around, when this battle happens, battle not in the battlefield, but this is a battle of the dice. Dice was a weakness for Yudhishthira. So when this game happens and the Pandavas lose everything, the Kauravas take possession of entire Indraprastha, and there is that game of dice had certain rules that whoever is the loser leaves the kingdom for 12 years, hides for 1 year, lives in incognito for 1 year, and through that 1 year, if they were to be found, they would not be given the kingdom, and if they do so care for asking for this kingdom, they would have to go back and do 12 more years and 1 year more of incognito. The Pandavas agreed to it, having lost everything, including their pride, including their self-worth. They go through the forest for 12 years. They live in the Virata kingdom doing menial jobs for 1 year. For no rhyme or reason, Dhritarashtra does not give this kingdom back to the Pandavas because of Duryodhana's plan. Again, under Shakuni's guided deviousness. Now, it is at that time that Lord Krishna is sent to the Kauravas by the Pandava, representing the Pandavas, as an ambassador, asking for, if not 5 villages, at least 5 provinces. Duryodhana does not agree to even give 5 houses. In his own words, not even the amount of land that can be placed on the tip of a needle. Thus being rejected, the Pandavas challenged the Kauravas, Duryodhana and the 100 of them, for a war. I would say, strategically speaking, this was the First World War, wherein kings from various kingdoms all across the globe participated. People from Far East, people from Middle East, people from different continents, all of them came down. and this was on the battlefield. Now, between the Kauravas and Pandavas, there were lot of years that had gone by. Because we watch a lot of movies, lot of TV series which have depicted Krishna as a young and energetic, charming personality. No doubt he was charming, but the age, if you look at the chronological order in both Mahabharata and Bhagavata, it is said that the hunter's arrow hit Lord Krishna's toe. At that time, he was 125 years old. This happened 36 years after the war. So, during the war, Bhagavan Krishna was about 89 years old. Yudhishthira and Bhima were older than Bhagavan Krishna. Arjuna, Nakula, Sahadeva were younger than Bhagavan Krishna. So, they were all in late 80s. At that age, standing up for what was right, what was righteous, which was snatched away, which was not given to them in a righteous manner in first place. The entire Hastinapura was supposed to be given down to Yudhishthira. But then it was divided and half of it was given, which was snatched again. They spent 12 years in that penance, 1 year of incognito, total of 13 years. And when they come back, not even a village, not even a house was given to them. So, there was those who were violated and those who were the victimizers. So, between the Kauravas and Pandavas, there was a war. Now, imagine that in that war, there are people from different kingdoms represented, from different continents represented, all of them have assembled. How big was the assembly of these people warring? It is given in Vedavyasji's own account that in this Mahabharata war, the epic war, there were 18 Akshohinis of armies. Akshohini is a technical term used to say that it was 18 battalions. Each battalion, just the human count, was about 250,000 people. Thus, there were 18 times 250,000, about 4.5 billion people. Now, that many people on one ground. 11 Akshohinis, 11 battalions were supporting Kaurava and 7 were supporting Pandavas. If you can imagine, if you can visualize, 11 battalions, each battalion with 250,000 and 7 battalions spread across in a battlefield. It was humongous. The war was about to begin just about the time of sunrise. It is at that time that the Pandavas had to blow the conch, demanding their rights and challenging the Kauravas for their rights. But instead, the Pandavas hear the conch being blown by the Kauravas. Arjuna is shaken up, because it was they who were violated. It was their rights which were not given to them, and it was their opportunity to challenge, but instead he hears this conch which was indication that the Kauravas were challenging them. Feeling quite infuriated, Arjuna asks Krishna to take the chariot to check who dares challenge the Pandavas, knowing very well that the conch because each conch makes a different sound. That conch, specific conch sound, was none other than Bhishma. How could Bhishma, who was their commanding general, make such an erroneous step? This is from the Pandavas side. Now, looking at the Kauravas side, Duryodhana, who was right next to Bhishma, instead of talking something that would inspire the entire Kaurava army, he was talking something that would demoralize the entire Kaurava army. Now, why was this happening? Before the war began, before the war could be announced, Yudhishthira from the Pandava side shot 3 arrows towards the commanding general and his support. In those days, it was a norm that though somebody in the opposite side, somebody who is being challenged, is on your enemy's side, but if you have respect for them, you shoot an arrow at their feet, not on their feet, at their feet, showing your respect, offering your prostrations. So, Yudhishthira shot 3 arrows, one towards Bhishma, Drona and Kripacharya. He respected them. Bhishma, having seen this attitude of humility from Yudhishthira, asks Yudhishthira, is this prostration given to the commanding general or to your grandfather? Yudhishthira very humbly says that definitely it is to his guru and his beloved grandfather. Now, being on the Kaurava side, Bhishma says, lifting both his hands, Vijayi Bhava. Now, hearing that, Duryodhana is totally angered. He is infuriated with his own anger that you are my commanding general, how can you bless them to be the victorious ones? This is not right. And then he starts insulting Bhishma, insulting Drona, insulting Kripacharya. Now, seeing that it was demoralizing, the only way that he could have shut Duryodhana, that his voice would be drowned, that he pulled out his conch and blew it loud. Now, Bhishma knew the trick, and he, blowing the conch, inadvertently announced the war. And on this side, Arjuna had seen this as a wrong thing, again done by the Kauravas. So, he challenged Bhagavan Krishna to find who exactly blew the conch. Now, as Arjuna's chariot is going in front of the Kaurava army to visually get a look at who did this mistake, something terrible happened to Arjuna, that he psychologically started collapsing in that chariot right there. Now, to understand this psychological collapse of Arjuna, we will have to go one day back into the history. We find that Arjuna and the rest of the Pandavas had camped out in Kurukshetra. Their camp was well established. They had their strategies planned. Everybody retires back to their own little tents. When Bhagavan Krishna has left the tent of the Pandavas into his own tent and he is trying to rest, he finds a chariot running towards the Pandavas. And each chariot has a flag on the top. And he saw that it was Dhritarashtra's chariot. Now he wondered, why was the blind king coming towards the Pandava camp? Quickly he grabbed his stuff on his chariot, ran to the Pandava course. And in that camp, it was not Dhritarashtra who had come, but it was his attender, his personal secretary, Sanjaya, who was sent. That Sanjaya was sent by Dhritarashtra with a devious plan. The plan as etched by Dhritarashtra himself. He saw that the strength of his son's army would be if Bhishma is on that battlefield. Bhishma was their firewall. Bhishma was their guard. And the only one who could challenge this Bhishma on that battlefield and put him down on arrows was Arjuna. None else could challenge Bhishma. So Dhritarashtra laid out a plan that the only way that Arjuna could be made ineffective if he was psychologically disturbed. So he sends this message through Sanjaya to Arjuna, and he was also instructed, do not deliver this message if Bhagavan Krishna is sitting there. Now Bhagavan Krishna, who had seen this chariot coming in, by the time Bhagavan Krishna arrived, the Pandavas were already seated and Sanjaya was standing there delivering the message, about to deliver the message of Dhritarashtra. As soon as Bhagavan Krishna entered that camp, there was a hesitation in the eyes of Sanjaya, and quickly grasping it, Bhagavan Krishna looks at Yudhishthira and says, hey Yudhishthira, do you mind me being here? Now Yudhishthira gets up from his throne, invites Bhagavan Krishna, seats him on his throne and sits at his feet. Oh no, I don't have any problem, Bhagavan. Your presence is welcomed. Now Sanjaya has lost the opportunity to say that this message can be delivered only to Pandavas. Now he narrates the entire message given by Dhritarashtra. Now while that message was being given, which verbatim is repeated by Arjuna in the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which we will see what that message was. Yudhishthira was not shaken up because he was convinced that he was standing up for the righteous cause, to bring dharma back. Nakula Sahadeva were not confused because their convictions were firmly rooted in whatever Yudhishthira's directions were. They were not confused. Bhima, on the other hand, was sitting on a throne, and it is called Simhasana. There are two effigies of the Simha, the lion, made of gold. He got so angered that in his anger he pulped down the entire throne into powder. So he was the only one who was fighting there, not for dharma but for quenching his thirst of vengeance. Meaning, for various reasons, all other four brothers were convinced that the war is inevitable. The one who got little confused, to whom this message was intended for, Arjuna, started thinking, brooding in a wrong direction. Now Lord Krishna first had to handle with Sanjaya, then had to handle with Arjuna. So in handling Sanjaya, he said, hey Yudhishthira, if I answer on your behalf, do you mind? And as would be the case, Bhagavan said that the answer will be given on the battlefield. Now Arjuna, on the other hand, was demoralized, confused with the message given. There was something which was not to be kindled in his heart, which was kindled. And it was in that battlefield when he heard the conch, and Bhagavan Krishna thought, good, let this message hit Arjuna directly, and if it is full blown confusion, that he could have an opportunity to correct him on the right diagnosis. So, to such a confused Arjuna who lost track of his duties, responsibilities, who lost the understanding of what was dharma and what was adharma, that message which was given by the Lord is called Bhagavad Gita. So, nonetheless, this Bhagavad Gita was given on the battlefield. But this was given so that one understands one's own responsibilities. At every crossroad of life, we have Pandavas and Kauravas within our own head. Our own baser intellect and the higher intellect constantly is at a fight with each other. And what seems to be more strong, more powerful is our baser self because of the quantity. And what seems to be few that can be counted on fingers are our positive traits. Constantly at every intersection of responsibility, when the responsibility has to be fulfilled, there is a friction within. Hundreds of these negative thoughts fighting with few of these positive thoughts. Who wins? That who is nourished wins. That who is supported and channelized wins. Definitely, as a history, we know that the Pandavas won. But what was that turning point which brought that clarity and conviction to understand their own responsibilities? That is Bhagavad Gita. Now, the Bhagavad Gita message is not just for Arjuna, through Arjuna to the rest of humanity. Don't we get lost? Don't we lose track of what is purposeful, what is right to be done? Because at every intersection we have choices. There is never a situation where there is no choice. But the debate comes between the choice of right and the choice of easy. And we as human beings always choose the easy and leave the right. Now, how to analyze one's own life? How to bring in that attitude wherein we can see, perceive every single experience and make the right choices at the right time. That message is given in this Bhagavad Gita, which we will elaborately see through in this effort, through this program Sanskriti. So, in the next talk, we will continue forward. Hari Om.